Welcome to Atheist Talk on KTNF, AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota. Good morning to all of you joining us locally by radio and streaming online. We appreciate you tuning in. Today is Sunday, December 29th, 2013. I am your host, Carl Hancock. Today I'm interviewing Dr. Peter Boghossian. Dr. Boghossian is a philosopher, skeptic, author, and public speaker. He is currently an instructor of philosophy at Portland State University in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences Department of Philosophy. Dr. Boghossian's primary research areas are critical thinking and moral reasoning. He joins us today on Atheist Talk to discuss his recently published book, A Manual for Creating Atheists. The interview with Dr. Boghossian is pre-recorded, so we won't be able to take your questions during the show. However, we are happy to accept emails to radio@minnesotaatheists.org. We'll try to get to those as soon as they come in. So thanks for joining us, Peter.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Now, the first question I wanted to ask you, on the back of your book, you say you were thrown out of the doctoral program at the University of New Mexico's philosophy department. So
yes, that's a factual statement.
So I was curious if you wouldn't mind letting us know why you were thrown out.
Well, here's what I would recommend your listeners do. If you Google University of New Mexico Philosophy Department, and then there's a contact bar, all of the information is there for your listeners to contact them and ask them. And I give full permission for that information to be disclosed.
Oh, okay. So just get the information from them then, huh?
Yeah.
Now, why did you decide to write a manual for creating atheists?
I decided to write it because, well, let me back up and say thank you for reading the book. We spoke briefly off air.
Yep, no problem.
And because you've read the book, it makes this interview significantly easier. I decided to read the book because I had had enough. I had had enough of the silliness. I had had enough of people misconstruing what's in their own interest and the interest of the communities. And I had had enough with all the people who had gotten hurt as a result of faith-based epistemologies or ways that people come to knowledge. And I knew that something had to be done about this. And while I'm not the sort of guy who does the FFRF with Dan Barker, Freedom from Religion Foundation sort of legal things, I wanted to apply my unique skill set to the problem of faith and faulty epistemologies. So that's why I wrote the book.
So could you tell us what is street epistemology?
Great next question. Epistemology is just a fancy word for how one knows what one knows, and street epistemology is the idea that people can be given tools to talk people out of faith and superstition and into reason, and to help them understand and lawfully align their beliefs with reality. And it can be done anywhere. It doesn't have to be done in an academic context, hence the word street. It can be done literally anywhere. So it's not, I wanted to decouple the word epistemology from the idea that this is something that's only done in an academy.
So you're not saying that we should go out in the street and start preaching science and reason and stuff like that. This is more like a one-on-one, person-to-person account, right?
It's an interesting notion to preach science. It's not about preaching. If somebody has a radically mistaken view of reality, and you help them understand that the view they have of reality is mistaken, there's nothing preachy about that. That's just education. I do want to say that embedded within that is the possibility that we could be wrong, or the possibility that I could be wrong. And I don't know of any preachers who preach the idea that they're wrong and that they should be willing to revise their beliefs. So I don't see anything preachy about the education or the public understanding of science or helping people to lawfully align their beliefs with reality.
So more like science would be things are always changing, and it can always change.
Yeah, and so there's a scientific method, a scientific process, and then there are conclusions that come from that process, and we get things like electricity and airplanes and computers and all kinds of great stuff that we gave our kids over over the holidays, little gizmos, gadgets. Those are the results or the consequences or the conclusions, if you will, of the scientific process. But I will say, in no uncertain terms, that I'm also willing to jettison the scientific method itself if something better comes along, more predictive and more parsimonious. I'd love to know what that is, but the idea is that all of our cognitions and ways that we come to knowledge should be, at least in principle, open to revision if it can be shown to us that we're in error. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. Now, could you go over the definition of what faith is?
Sure. There are many definitions of faith historically, scripturally, from different faith traditions have their own definition of faith. I prefer two definitions of faith, which I spent a whole chapter on, more or less, explicating. One is my definition that I offer, and I have a YouTube talk about it. Faith is pretending to know things you don't know. That's one definition. And the other definition is belief, either belief without at some root level, it's belief without evidence, but it could be belief that's unattuned to the evidence or belief on the basis of insufficient evidence. But it's something when the degree of confidence one places in a belief is not warranted by the evidence. And to pick up the slack for that, that's when we use the word faith.
Now, I know you also go over definitions of an agnostic, and you kind of say that that's not something we should use. Yeah,
and I had one more thought on that, so
sure.
if I may. So I've been thinking about a conversation I had with John W. Loftus about presuppositional apologetics. I don't know how complex or how much detail you want me to get into or your listeners want, but one of the deliverables from that conversation was that all apologetics is presuppositional. And the more one thinks about that, the more absolutely profound that is. All of these faith claims, you have to at some level presuppose that they're true. You have to just go in, except by fiat, or go in with the assumption that they're true. And Bart Ehrman talks about this. That's the difference between an historical claim and a theological claim. And I think when those two things are wedded, a lot of the silliness becomes more clear.
Oh, okay.
Oh, so yeah, I'm not a fan of the word agnostic, and I don't advocate its use.
So why wouldn't you advocate its use?
Because I think it's a way to obfuscate. I think it assumes that there's So even just to take a step back,
sure.
The idea that I mentioned before of a confidence value in one's belief, we need to be given sufficient evidence or reason, and someone posted a video on this, of a lecture I did about this for my atheism class. We need to be given sufficient evidence to warrant belief before we can even say maybe. So if there's a 1 to 10 scale of 1 being no way, 5 being maybe, 10 being absolutely positive, the question becomes, how could one even be an agnostic unless one had evidence for the existence, unless one had some reason to believe in the existence of God in the first place? And if there's no argument, no evidence, nothing, then we can do away with the term. I think it's a cop-out, frankly.
Kind of like unicorns could be possible or something like that, right?
Well, that's exactly right. Thanks for reading the book. You're not a unicorn agnostic, right? You don't think, there could be some unicorns over there in Denmark
or fairies or whatever, yeah.
Yeah, over Manhattan or in some place in Detroit. No, you're a unicorn atheist.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to apply the same principle to invisible metaphysical entities for which there's absolutely not an iota of evidence.
Yeah, I agree with that. Now, what about atheists? What's a good definition for an atheist? I know you don't identify as an atheist per se, do you? And,
no, I don't. This is the sort of thing, no matter what I say or who considers it radical, nobody says anything. I define the word atheist, everybody freaks out. They're up in arms. They're upset.
Yeah.
We need some definition so that we can move the conversation forward. And if we don't define it, then we're just going to sit and talk about how upset we are about about the word atheist, and everybody wants to co-opt it. So if you and I are going to have a conversation, here's the definition that I use, that I advocate using, so that we can at least move the conversation forward. I'm happy to have a conversation about this. An atheist, there are two ways to define it. The principal way is a person who doesn't believe in God because there's insufficient evidence to warrant that belief. However, if that person were given sufficient evidence, they would believe in God. That is the way that I use the term atheist.
Okay. Now, would you say your book is not just about to read, but also a tool to use to talk to people out of their faith? So it's more like a tool also, right?
Yeah, it's a tool to help people abandon superstition, faulty epistemologies, bad ways of knowing, poor ways of thinking about the world and reality, and embrace better ways of thinking about reality, better ways of... it's not about the conclusions that one holds, it's about the process of belief formation that one uses. So it's a way to help people through conversations to value reason, rationality, the scientific process, just by speaking to them.
All right. Now we're going to take a break, and then we'll be right back with Peter Boghossian on Atheist Talk Radio on KTNF 950, Minnesota. Welcome back to AM 950, KTNF, the progressive voice of Minnesota. You're tuned in to Atheist Talk. I'm your host, Carl Hancock. Today's guest is Dr. Peter Boghossian, the author of A Manual for Creating Atheists. Now I thought we'd get to if you could give us some examples of how to go about talking people out of faith into reason. I know you have some conversations in there and stuff, so I was wondering if you could give us a little example.
Sure. So it's a little bit difficult for me to kind of pluck an example out. I have a video online, or a bunch of videos. They're free, so I'm not selling anything. They're just on YouTube. If you type in my name, those examples of conversations will come up. So there's a lot to put in. You need to know the background, and we talked a little bit about the background of some definitions of terms, but you also need blunt instruments when you engage people of faith, like not creating adversarial relationships and modeling behaviors. And I use the Socratic method, and there's no possible way I could explain that to you in 1 or 2 minutes. The gross oversimplification is it's a way of asking questions instead of telling. So the first thing you do is you establish rapport, and then you really understand what somebody knows or doesn't know, or how they claim to know it. And then there's just a few templates that one follows, that one asks pretty simple questions and waits for a response, and then uses the Socratic method to ask them follow-up questions. And the idea is to bring them down one stage, or to instill a little doubt, using this thing called the trans-theoretical model. So the template shows how to instill doubt in people at all levels of faith-based indoctrination.
So what are some of the subjects we should avoid when talking someone out of faith? I know you mentioned politics would be a big no. So what is the other ones we should avoid?
God and religion.
God and religion?
Yeah.
So why should we avoid God and religion?
Many reasons, because there's just no evidence that let me put it this way. Why should one avoid talking about God? Because the problem is not belief in God. The problem is not that people believe in an invisible metaphysical entity and they think that it tells them to do something, or hate homosexuals, whatever it is that they think it tells them to do. The problem is the belief-forming mechanism. The problem is that people use a faulty way to come to that conclusion. And even if one did disabuse someone of a belief in God, the faulty epistemology, the way that one comes to knowledge, is still be in place. would still be in place, and then they would believe other preposterous things, or metaphysical things, moral things, epistemological things. So admittedly, talking about God is an easy bullseye, but we're interested in helping people develop more reliable ways of knowledge. The other problem with that is if you look at that as a debate, then you're worsening someone's epistemic situation because they become better arguers. As Michael Shermer says, they become better at rationalizing things that they're already pretending to know. So you're making someone's epistemic situation worse by talking about God or religion, particularly God.
So basically, the faith would be talking them out of believing in such things as Jesus flying through the air or whatever their religion is?
No, even more fundamental than that. Those are conclusions that come about as a result of a faith-based epistemology, or an epistemology, a way to come to knowledge that one simply cannot rely upon if one's goal is to lawfully align one's beliefs with reality. Now, if one's goal is to make one feel good, then that seems to me a legitimate thing to say. But if one's goal is the truth, then that's the case. So to reframe your question, don't talk about anything except faith and how people know what they know, and then gently guide them through the process of understanding that those beliefs are unhinged from reality, and beliefs that are not tethered from reality have less of a likelihood to be true. And then that's when that aporia is there, or that moment of puzzlement or doubt is there, that's when we can start rebuilding the foundation for belief in the basis of evidence. But conceptualizing the problem in terms of God or abortion or gun control or whatever it is, it's a mistake. And it not only will it not work, but it will worsen the situation.
So it'll make them more rigid against what you're saying then, right?
Yeah, so there'd be so the literature is pretty clear on this. There's a certain percentage of people, they'll just dig deeper. They'll dig down and they'll hunker down in the beliefs that they already have. But if that weren't bad enough, by the very fact that you engage them on this in the first place means that they get good at this over time, right? And when they get good at this over time, they become more certain, because then they can dispense with bad arguments. So they become more certain that their delusions are true. So by doing that, you've made their situation worse. So it's about helping people, not about winning an argument, not about ridiculing people, not about beating people down. It's about helping them to have reliable mechanisms of belief formation. And any time you conceptualize it as something other than that and focus the conversation on God or religion or what have you, you've made their epistemic situation worse. You have not done themselves any favors, and you certainly haven't done your community any favors.
All right. Is it safe to say we should treat faith as a virus?
I think so. I think we should treat it as a virus both on the macro level and the micro level. And I think the reason for that is there are many reasons. I don't know why people think that I came up with this. I perhaps should have been more clear in the book. I absolutely, positively did not come up with this, and I give some original citations for the folks who did come up with this. Individually, it helps us be less adversarial in our relationships, and it helps to treat the faithful the way they ought to be treated as individuals, as hosts of a virus. And so we should never be mad with the host, but we should try to do everything we can to help them dislodge the virus. And it's an unusual virus because one of the defense mechanisms of the virus is that the host wants it and likes it, enjoys it. But the other thing is, from a macro level, it helps in terms of Chapter 9 of my book, Containment Protocols, to look at faith as a virus. It helps when we think about this in terms of a macro intervention. It helps epidemiologically.
Now, is faith dangerous to society, and could you give us some examples why?
Yeah, I'm always puzzled when people ask that question. It just seems so blatantly obvious to me that it's dangerous to society. It's an epistemic horror show, right? We have entire nation states built around faith-based systems, and the punishment for questioning these systems is death. And I just read about a man in Saudi Arabia who would be punished with the ultimate punishment. They'll take his life for for belief on the basis of insufficient evidence. Now, when this is presented to people, some people will say, well, certain leftist apologists will say, well, it's just their culture and we shouldn't interfere and it is what it is. But most other rational, sane people will have different responses to that. Some responses from apologists will be, well, that's not my religion. We don't have to look very far to look at the politicians as a reflection of the electorate in terms of the treatment of homosexuals. I don't know. I'm just so stunned that there are so many problems with faith-based epistemologies that that I don't even feel the need to list them.
Yeah. We'll return to our guest, Dr. Peter Boghossian, after the break. Please stay with us. I'm Carl Hancock, and you're listening to Atheist Talk on KTNF AM 950. Welcome back to Atheist Talk on AM 950 KTNF. I'm your host, Carl Hancock. We're speaking with philosopher and skeptic, Dr. Peter Boghossian, author of a book, A Manual for Creating Atheists. Now, a next good question would be, you go over multiculturalism. Also, could you tell us what the dangers of that is, especially to women?
So Chapter 8 in my book, I talk about academia, and I talk about the problems with academia. And if people are not familiar with the current academic landscape, then anything that I would say now would seem not just bizarre, but a caricature, and they couldn't believe it. But then I receive emails from people all around the country, and they say, wow, thank you so much for this. It's a complicated question. We could spend an hour on it, but the idea in Chapter 8 is that why are academicians so terrified of discussing faith-based beliefs and faith-based processes, and particularly when it comes to Islam? Why is that? Excuse me. I talk about that in the book, and the idea is that, it's a big idea condensed down, is that epistemological critique, that is, critique of a criticism of the way people come to knowledge, went from just that, a critique or a criticism of the way people know things, to a moral taboo. And how did that come to be? And to answer your question specifically, multiculturalism plays a role in that, is that an invasive value that's not found in classical liberalism or social liberalism, and I talk about those in the book. And so that has devastating consequences across the board for an entire generation of students who are taught to withhold epistemological critique as opposed to learning how to make better, more discerning judgments.
So what are some of the reasons people convert to faith, and who is more likely to get the faith virus?
Oh, people can become faithful for any one of a number of reasons. Personal tragedy in their lives, they can't seem to get their acts together, poor home lives, alcohol and drug problems. So people, for any one of a number of reasons. And what was the second half of your question?
Who is more likely to get the faith virus?
I think people who have been down and out in their luck, and people who are grasping at how to make a better life for themselves. Either that, or I should say, and people who have been indoctrinated into epistemic communities, children in particular, who are told that unless they hold certain beliefs that they're going to burn in hell for eternity along with their families. A ghastly form of child abuse, as Dawkins says, and I agree with him. Yeah. Those people are very likely to get the faith virus.
Now, if all atheists started talking people out of faith, how long do you think, in your opinion, before faith would be irrelevant?
I don't know. It's an empirical, kind of a hypothetical empirical question. Mm-hmm. I don't know the answer to that. I do know one thing. It would certainly expedite the downfall of faith. I can't give you a date. I really don't know. Yeah. And as you know, you read the book. I also don't pretend to know things I don't know. Yep. So I can't. It would be a stab in the dark. I really don't know. Yeah,
it'd just be it could be many years or Or maybe never, huh?
I don't think it would be maybe never. I think we're already seeing the erosion of faith-based epistemologies and declining indices of religiosity and other variables that are associated with religious faith-based beliefs.
Yeah.
But I don't know how long it would be.
I know the United States has taken a big turn also. There's more atheists coming out.
Yeah, there's good news for that. It has. Other parts of the world, it's less clear to me, particularly in the Islamic world. So hopefully that will be the next. Hopefully that will be the next frontier, if you will.
Now, when it comes to faith-based claims in the classroom, is there some advice you could give to teachers?
Yeah, same advice I give to everybody, even if you're not a teacher. Be direct, be honest, be sincere, and be blunt. Don't be held hostage to the faith-based delusions of others. If somebody asks a question or makes a statement and they say that the reason for belief was on the basis of faith, then they should be called out on that, just as if someone said that the reason for belief was on the basis of sacrificing a goat.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to skeptical thinking in classes, there seems to be very little, and that can be a problem. So what should schools do in order to have more critical thinking in order to avoid unfounded beliefs?
Schools in terms of K through 12 or schools in terms of higher ed?
I would say both.
Well, those are very different questions. In terms of K through 12, I'd recommend that teachers use the educational materials and resources that are already available and that they don't have to pay. They're for free. Non-profit organizations like the James Randi Educational Foundation, and that's JREF, puts out tremendous material on teaching people to evaluate evidence. And they have curriculum guides for instructors that are built in. Very fun, very accessible. In the higher education, it's a completely different question that's far more complicated, partially because K through 12 is more homogenous, but the higher education, you're dealing with specific subjects. I think as a general rule, it needs to be institutionalized across the curriculum.
So I know a lot of people who have PhDs or whatever, they still have faith-based beliefs that are unfounded, so that would be an indication that college needs to do more critical thinking classes, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, so the problem is that, I mean, it's a very complicated problem. If somebody has faith-based beliefs, again, it's an extraordinarily complicated problem because first of all, you're talking about the differentiation between, K through 12 and higher education. And higher education, people are expected a different intellectual level, a different educational level by definition, right, and a different maturity level. Mm-hmm. One of the things that you'll find in K through 12 educational systems, and we try to get critical thinking in the high schools, and there's someone in my department who's trying to do that right now, we found a lot of resistance. Everyone loves it when you debunk, I'm getting a cold, someone else's superstitions. But when you start to debunk their superstitions, that's when they draw the line. And so the defensive posture goes up, the defensive mechanisms go up, and people then reject any form of critical inquiry. There's a video that someone posted about why Christian homeschoolers don't want their children learning debate because they're afraid that they'll abandon their faith. So, again, these are complicated problems that don't lend themselves to simple answers. But if I were going to give a simple answer, I would say we have to change basic values to make skepticism, critical inquiry, and rationality a value.
Yeah, I know Michael Shermer, who runs Skeptic magazine. He has kind of one. His magazine goes for adults and children also. Exactly. So that
exactly. It's a fantastic. In fact, when I was in LA, I went to the offices. They have a wonderful dog, and I saw the truly astonishing number of books. There's Skeptic for children. There's Skeptic for adults. In fact, I use in my critical thinking class, I use the Baloney Detection Kit, which is a wonderful little thing, and students love it because it's only $5. But the skeptics Society. Michael Shermer has some fantastic resources available to people and to students, and I read those. And again, they're a nonprofit educational organization, and those materials are very, very, very inexpensive. And I teach large classes of 120 plus, and it just makes it easy if everybody's on the same page and it's accessible to students.
Yeah. I have the 2-volume set of the Skeptic Encyclopedia of Pseudoscience, and that's a pretty good resource also.
Fantastic. Yeah. So the key for those things is, one of the things, the switches I've made in my teaching is I used to pack it with tons and tons of deliverables, but now I've significantly altered that model and only offer 4 or 5 deliverables. Pretty basic deliverables, some more intellectually taxing, that requires more intellectual horsepower than others. But again, those resources are completely available to you. And for people who teach, the Skeptic magazine has posted my syllabi are online for reason, rationality, understanding, and atheism. So you can download those at absolutely no cost for free. Not even if you're an educator. Anybody can download those.
Yeah. Now, should atheists be worried about getting the faith virus also?
No, I mean, everybody should, not worried, no, but everybody should be constantly trying to up their game to develop mechanisms that they can rely upon that will discern truth from falsity, so that they can weed out false beliefs and have more true beliefs. You'll get more bang for the buck, by the way, if you stop believing things that are false than if you just go out and try to believe things that are true. But everybody, if one is genuinely concerned about their epistemic life and leading a thoughtful, examined life, then the way to do that is to make sure that the way that you come to knowledge can be relied upon.
So when it comes to skepticism, just to keep learning and developing your skills, right?
Well, not only that, but to make sure that at the fore of anything you place belief revision. You're open to the idea that you should that you should revise your beliefs. If we place that front and center first and foremost, that's going to get us the most bang for the buck. As long as we nurture those attitudinal dispositions indispensable to developing critical rationality, we'll be fine. Nothing to worry about.
Okay. Now, is fear a big factor when it comes to the faith virus? I know a lot of people don't want to leave their faith because of fear or rejection also.
Yeah, fear's a factor. Community's a factor. Friends are a factor. Social and interpersonal malus are factors. There are many factors. It's multivariate. There are many factors. What role those factors play, I haven't seen any evidence to prioritize those or kind of hierarchically determine what those are. I don't know the answer to that, but I know that there are many reasons for why people stay in faith traditions, why people leave, and why people leave faith traditions.
Community would also be a big reason to stay in the faith community, right?
That's absolutely correct, and that's why the secular movement needs to do more to be welcoming to those people of faith. And that's why my favorite places to speak are churches, mosques, synagogues, and temples.
Oh, really? Do you go to a lot of those?
Not as many as I'd like.
So how many do you usually go to in a week or so?
Well, I just did one in L.A. Excuse me, that was in a church. Don't do many. I haven't been invited to a mosque or a temple. I would see that's the thing. That's the idea that they don't, in general, well, no, almost even more than in general, almost a universal rule across the board. The whole idea is that they think that they've latched on to eternal truth. And the problem that gets back to the question and the definition of faith. The definition of faith, remember when I mentioned taking up the slack? Mm-hmm. Well, because the word faith is invoked at all, then one has to develop non-epistemic ways to defend that belief. So one is believing something on the basis of insufficient evidence. And when that's questioned, one can't present the evidence because one simply doesn't have any evidence. So one needs to do something else. One needs to go deeper into a state of pretending. One needs to become upset, become enraged. Well, one needs to do any one of a number of things. Say they're insulted, walk away, cry, clench their fist. I mean, they have to do something non-epistemic.
We're going to go take a break. Please stay with us, and we'll return to Atheist Talk and our guest, Dr. Peter Boghossian. I'm Carl Hancock, and you're listening to AM 950 KTNF, the progressive voice of Minnesota. Thank you for tuning in to Atheist Talk on AM 950 KTNF. I'm your host, Carl Hancock. Before we return to our guest, Dr. Peter Boghossian, we have a few announcements. First, I'd like to thank our sponsors. Thank you to Cucumbers Restaurant at 75th and France in Edina. Thank you to Georgia Hancock Soy, your farmer's insurance agent. You can find Georgia on farmersagents.com/G-Hancock. And thank you to the Humanists of Minnesota. You can learn more about the Humanists of Minnesota at humanistofmn.org. If you appreciate and enjoy listening to this program, we encourage you to visit mnatheist.org to donate to the radio show. Thank you to those who have donated in the past week and as well, and those of you who are monthly sustaining donors. We sincerely appreciate your support and the support of all our contributors. Our music is composed by a member, Brent Michael Davids. As always, check out the Minnesota Atheist website. We have podcasts and previous programs. You can subscribe to the Atheist Weekly email, and if you aren't already, you can sign up to be a member of Minnesota Atheists. You can browse articles, books, reviews, and the calendar of upcoming events. Thanks for listening, and now let's get back to Dr. Boghossian. I always say that wrong for some reason.
You're fine. That's fine.
Now,
you can call me Peter. Just call me Peter. That's good.
Now, one of the questions I wanted to ask was, after someone has left their faith, could you tell us some good examples of what information to give out to help someone?
Sure. I just did a Q&A on that. I keep some cards in my wallet, and I have a friend of mine who's a humanist minister, Bernie, and I have his number on there, and CFI, Portland, local, all local. I think that's key, by the way, that they're not national organizations. They're new communities that people can have fun with, and it depends on the age, too. So, if someone likes the same activities I like, I invite them to do stuff with me. I'm extraordinarily busy, but there are communities that they can belong to with my friends. So, for example, they can do jiu-jitsu, and there's a pretty strong community there. But basically, I would urge people to think locally and to have that information available to people once they do instill doubt.
And I know a good resource would be richarddawkins.net also.
Yeah, the Richard Dawkins Foundation for Reason and Science is fantastic, and there are online communities that are great. Twitter is a wonderful little online community, but I think nothing ultimately substitutes for boots on the ground, if you will. Nothing ultimately substitutes for individuals that we know in real life that we can see and talk to and have conversations with, and there are local skeptic organizations and skeptics in the pub or what have you. Again, I don't know what it is in your neck of the woods, but each locally there are organizations to help people and make new friends and go to barbecues and all that stuff. Date maybe, all that stuff.
Yeah, we have like a meetup site, and we have like over 1,000 visitors or members, and also we have monthly meetups at the library and stuff like that. So that's
perfect. Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect.
Now, are there different stages that people go through when it comes to faith, and could you give us some examples?
Yeah, there are in the book. Again, I mentioned it before, but I use the trans-theoretical model, and there are 5 stages. The first 3 are the most pertinent for our needs. They're pre-contemplative, contemplative, and action. And there are different stages that people go to when they leave faith. In general, leaving faith is a slow process, but going into faith seems to be, in many cases, a quick process. That's not always true, but more often than not, that seems to be true. And I think that's chapter 4 in my book where I talk about that.
Yeah. Now, after the fall, that's one of your chapters. Someone has just stopped believing in God. Could you go over how they can get more resources on stuff like after the
Excuse
fall?
me, yeah. So Chapter 7 of the Manual for Creating Atheists has, I think it's Chapter 7 is after, Chapter 6, excuse me, my bad, is after the fall. And so in that, it's not just that we leave, it's essential that we don't leave people in the cold, which piggybacks to your earlier question of what we can do. In addition to having cards and helping people find communities, it's vital that that hole is plugged. The hole of pretending to know things they don't know and believing on the basis of insufficient evidence is plugged by reason and rationality. So that's the substitute. That's what goes in its place. And when we do that, then a new sense of wonder can emerge. So we can help people reclaim that sense of wonder that's been destroyed or at the very least tainted by faith.
Now, do you see secularism pretty much taking over in the future also?
I think I don't know. I think so. I certainly hope so.
Yeah.
But
I know Europe.
The key. You mentioned Shermer, and I think that this is key. The key is that we need to convince people of the thing that's true. This is actually convincing, and the convincing is it's in religious people's best interest if we're secular. And Shermer argues most eloquently for why that is. It's in everybody's interest if the government stays out of the affairs of people in a religious context, and that prevents, because who's ever in the majority at the time. Now, we happen to have a majority of Protestant evangelicals, but for all we know, it could be Islam. We have any idea what it could be. So we need safeguards in place, and we need ways to adjudicate. We need a legal system that can protect our rights so that everybody can believe or not believe anything they want without any form of interference from the government. So secularism needs to be pitched to people, to religious people, precisely because it's in their interest. And that really is true. It is in their interest.
Yeah, because they don't want the government of some certain religion ruling them.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. They want... we need to put in proper safeguards, too. So, and again, we need to think about this. The people who are most... usually, we don't want any kind of tyranny of the majority. And so that's, for example, that's why we have a constitution. So that's my opinion of how we need to pitch that.
Well, that's. I think we only got a minute left, so I want to thank you again for coming on the show. And... thank you for tuning in to Atheist Talk on AM 950 KTNF. I'm your host, Carl Hancock. We're proud to be on the air with the Minnesota Atheists and hope that you've enjoyed the show. The show depends on the generous support of our members, our sponsors, and donors. Please consider supporting the show through the donation link at mnatheist.org. This has been Atheist Talk on AM 950 KTNF, the progressive voice of Minnesota. The podcast for the show will be on our radio page later today. Have a good Sunday.